When I was a boy and I used to visit my grandma in a semi-detached house in Morecambe in the 1970s, I took it for granted that she was old and just a little bit potty. She was lovely, and living with an aunt of mine, I also took it for granted that she forgot things, and as she was getting older, her jobs around the home seemed slightly more Python-esque. When dinner was being prepared, my aunt would rush around giving out jobs, and typically my grandma would sit with a pan of potatoes on her lap and a peeler, quite oblivious to the task in hand. My aunt would take the pan off her and say, "Thank you, mother," and then peel them herself. I'd occasionally hear the word senile in hushed conversations and not give it much thought until one day, quite out of the blue, to me at least, it was announced that my aunt could no longer cope and grandma was going into a beautiful sounding Hillcroft nursing home, a place where 3 members of staff only this year were imprisoned for abuse of the very people they should have been caring for. She spent a couple of months in this place, plucking at invisible specks on her skirt, her hair not quite as neat, and her constant request to come home falling on deaf ears. The place didn't seem that bad, a bit like a doctor's waiting room with a constant aroma of boiled cabbage and visitors sitting in huddles, talking in whispers, but she wasn't happy, and being lonely, confused and down in the dumps, the care home moved her on to an NHS unit. She was sent up there, a place of fear for local people, the Lancaster Moor Hospital, a Victorian asylum in the truest, grimmest sense. This was now the early 1980s, and it's strange looking back over the last couple of decades imagining that such a Victorian place ever existed. Row upon row of women, slumped, medicated and toothless, wailing, striking out at passers-by and deeply, deeply distressed. This time the smell of boiled cabbage was mixed with something altogether more human and fetid. I'd never seen my grandma without her hair in a bun, and now there she was, in some ill-fitting clothes, her long hair, silver and wild and loose. From this moment on, we never had another decent conversation. She was really anxious, and she was vanishing somewhere deep inside herself. After a few weeks and a series of falls, she was admitted to an NHS bedded ward, where we were told she was very poorly. She seemed to have disappeared completely now and was just this little head lying on a crisp white pillow, her hair now cropped and even wilder. I visited her with my parents, where they tried to talk about the weather, the food and television, stilted conversation that seemed somehow reserved for these times. You couldn't tell if she even knew we were there. Being a boy and a nervous joker, I tried to get her attention by putting on silly voices, dancing around and talking nonsense, generally showing off. Quite out of the blue, she looked me directly in the eyes and gave me the biggest of smiles and said, "Give over, you daft bugger." She died that night, but that look and those words thrill me to this day, and my own mum, who's 90 this year, still recalls that story with a mix of incredulity and pride. For me, just seeing the grandma I knew for a moment, when she seemed to have faded completely, was something of a revelation. I'll return to that moment in my understanding of dementia in a minute. It'd be easy to say that this was the 1980s and things have changed since then, but we mustn't lose sight of the Francis inquiry last year on neglect and abuse in the NHS, and a picture that we're all familiar with: adults being neglected, underpaid staff, some who'd be better off working at Tesco's, and just an all-round feeling of sadness, of ending your life anonymously, without a real sense of care, no rounding off of a life well lived. And dementia's still taboo, still very easy to hide someone away because we haven't got that miracle cure yet, and although I hear more and more about dementia on the TV and the radio and in the papers, it's all, I suppose, inevitably either doom and gloom, or else a research scientist has a new breakthrough that could spell the miracle cure for millions of people. And of course, because of our ageing population, I hear dementia described as some kind of ticking time bomb. I'd like to put what Kitwood describes as malignant social psychology and the way we disempower people affected by dementia to one side and ask, is our work in the arts all about big cures and miracle claims, so typical of the pharmaceutical giants? No. That's my answer. Our work's about the small scale. It's about the intimate, and it's about the profound. I guess the interesting thing that happened over these last few years for me was that I started talking to people about growing older, about dementia, and about positive ageing, regardless of prognosis. I was invited to speak at a conference about the relationship between the arts and health inequalities, and another speaker talked eloquently about her work in the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. I was riveted. Carrie McGee from New York is an educator there who's been instrumental in the development of a service that opens up the museum's extensive collection exclusively to people with dementia and their carers once a month. It was stunning. And now I'm not going to talk about this work in any depth because it's all available online and it's spreading around the country like wildfire, and I recommend it to you. But one of the key messages I took from the work of MoMA was garnered from the research undertaken by two people in the US, the gerontologist Professor Jean Cohen and the writer and researcher Anne Davis Basting, whose work with older people goes beyond remembering and reminiscence. In fact, their work suggests that in focusing exclusively on reminiscence, you're only working with the area of the brain that's failing, which can cause frustration, depression and anger for the person whose memory is failing. What they do suggest, however, is that when the cognitive skills are diminishing, the resultant impact on the individual is dis-inhibition. This typically results in often inappropriate behaviour, ranging from shouting and swearing to explicit sexual behaviour. This is often seen as another deficit or a challenge for managing, and has, I'm afraid, in the UK seen people prescribed unnecessary potent cocktails of antipsychotic drugs. And whilst I know the National Dementia Strategy aims to address this tendency to over-medicate people, it's still a problem. This increased disinhibition is relevant to us and is probably one of the most powerful opportunities, because it often means people who throughout their lives might not have been exposed to the creative side have, at this vulnerable moment in their lives, the opportunity to thrive and to grow. For me, this was a complete revelation. You can thrive in the depths of a disease like dementia. And yet Cohen and Basting are telling us they're persuasive, describing art like being chocolate for the brain, and Basting citing example after example of people who are suddenly given new creative opportunities to thrive. I'm not going to lay it on with the trowel because we know how devastating this illness is and how we're all individuals, so each of us will experience the disease differently. And I'm not saying that the arts are a cure-all. They're not. What I am saying is that this period of potential represents an opportunity to focus on a person's assets and not their illness and morbidity. In very real terms, it's like being able to say, I'm still human, I'm still me. Given that I'd left a conference with these new ideas and that I had the opportunity to work with NHS dementia services, I was indeed a fortuitous moment when an MA three-dimensional design student came knocking on my door looking to share his work. And I first met Darren Browett in 2011, and he came looking to test some of his ideas and was exploring the notion of memento mori. But this idea of testing his work, and my emerging ideas around those posited by Cohen and Basting, and which bore such rich fruit at MoMA, kept coming back to me. Perhaps this was an opportunity not just to test Darren's work, but some bigger ideas. Darren wanted to explore the possibility that his work could elicit conversation and stimulation, and I wanted to see where this could lead, bearing in mind the potential of the arts to engage at a deeper, emotional level, rather than focusing on the intellectual. So his ideas were based on an object that could be loaded with meaning and act somehow as a catalyst to conversation and debate, what Professor Lynn Froggatt at UCLan describes as an aesthetic third. Early on in his exploration, Browett had investigated the complex structures of pollen and the powerful symbolism of seeds as a metaphor to reconnect us with the natural world, representing the beginning and the end of life of plants, and the rebirth of seeds and fruit, and the endless and ever-repeating cycle. At the conference when I shared this paper, I shared a physical object, one of his fortuitous novelties. It's a small articulated object which, like a Christmas decoration from a childhood, turns inside out on itself. It's a beautifully designed object, and it had a profound impact on some of the people that I've shared it with. Indeed, one woman who apparently had lost all her word finding, in a session where we shared one of these articulated objects, she was able to speak fluently and completely appropriately about what was happening, and the artwork that we were exploring. The work did impact on memory in the sense that Anne Basting illustrates, where memory is not only an act of retrieval, but an act of creative storytelling, using imagination based on the here and now. And again, emphasising that memory is relational and not belonging to one person. In very real terms, the abstract nature of these objects has had the use of providing stimulus away from those carer-patient questions about dinner, the weather, the TV, those awkward questions, and are really powerful for eliciting conversation. This small-scale work that we're all involved in throws open the possibilities of new research, new ways of thinking, being and doing. And building on my own limited knowledge of dementia, I'm thrilled to be part of a multidisciplinary team that's working across 3 areas of the UK on a research project called Dementia and Imagination, which hopes, over these next few years, to better understand some of the things that are happening when people with dementia engage in art appreciation and making. Scientists and researchers are searching for the cure, the next big thing, the magic bullet. But what about us? What about the arts and health community? What about this world of culture and the arts? Does our work not merit research? Are we not searching for ways to make the experience of life more than just tolerable? I put it to you that the arts in their own right offer a powerful research tool that puts the quality of the lived human life at the core of its reason. And you know what? Our work isn't about exploring what it is to be ill. It isn't about the parts of us that are being stripped away by disease. It's about how, regardless of our diagnosis, regardless of our prognosis, and whatever our futures hold, we're more than a label and more than a collection of failing memories. We are in fact alive, and in these sometimes terrible moments, the arts give us a window of opportunity to be sentient again, maybe only for punctuated short periods. But in these moments, when our often dormant creativity is unleashed, we actually have the opportunity to flourish. And when the World Health Organization suggests that more people die from the effects of loneliness than they do from smoking, surely the communal possibilities of arts and culture have never been more important. I lost any opportunity of having a decent conversation with my grandma when she was admitted to a care home, and this in part was due to a lack of knowledge and thus an opportunity for the NHS to take creative risks. I think our work contributes to a new philosophy of how we live our lives in a post-recession world where we've seen the greed of corporate banks and mismanagement of government. Isn't it time we re-evaluated what's actually important to us? Culture and the arts have values in ways that are difficult to measure, especially in ways commensurate with the health sector that has for years only measured its successes and failure through crude targets and a culture of managerialism. Our work isn't about fake scientism. Our work is about valuing culture and the arts in their own right. The arts give us the tools to ensure that the most vulnerable people's lives are rightly enriched. And through all our practice, we have the opportunity to eliminate individual human potential and offer small moments to flourish and live life beyond reductive labels. More than that, we might just give people a voice to shout, "I'm still here and I'm still unique."